On December 12, 1982, I lost my father to a fatal car accident. I'll never forget that day. It was frigid, and our family was preparing for a big Christmas at my parents' house that year. Little did we know our Christmas would be marred by tragedy occurring a few short weeks prior. I was at work the day before my father's death. At my desk preparing reports, I saw a vision of my dad's face shrouded in white, peppered with multiple small cuts. His eyes closed as if he were sleeping. It was a quick flash. I thought to myself, car accident. Why am I thinking of this? Then, quickly putting it to the back of my mind, I continued working, trying to dismiss the thought as troubling as it was. Dad stayed on my mind that evening. Every time I called, I was told I had just missed him. My last call was around 11 p.m. after my shift ended. When I went to bed that night, I felt disappointed that I didn't get to speak with him earlier. Around 6 a.m. the following morning, I received a call informing me Dad was in a car accident and that I needed to get to the hospital. Unfortunately, once I arrived, I found out he didn't make it, and he was gone. Once I was allowed to see his body, I was in shock as I looked at his face shrouded with white towels lying atop a white pillow with tiny cuts, just like my vision the day before. His head was propped up with towels because of a broken neck. The cuts on his face were from the safety glass that shattered on impact. I was shaken by his sudden death and an unsettling and painfully prophetic premonition before his car accident. It was a cold winter night in February 1984. The wind howled outside our window, chilling us to the bone. I wrapped my arms around my 2-year-old daughter to cuddle and keep her warm. My husband and I moved to this small Oklahoma town because of a job opportunity 2 years prior. We rented a small 2-bedroom house with 1 bathroom. It was an old house, built in 1920, with no central heating or air. So instead, we used a 1-floor gas heater in our living room, which kept us pretty warm during winter. We used fans and opened windows for a cool breeze during the hot Oklahoma summers. The main bedroom was just off the living room and had no door, so I strung up a curtain to separate the rooms. Just off the living room towards the back of the house was our kitchen, and to the right of the kitchen was another small room that housed the only bathroom in the house. On this particular night, I decided to let our daughter sleep in our bed instead of her room at the back of the house because it was bitterly cold that night. Before going to bed, I turned up the gas heater and pulled open the curtain that separated the living room from the bedroom. Opening the curtain allowed for the small heater to warm up both rooms. We all went to bed around 9 p.m. that night. With our baby girl tucked snugly between us, we all slept soundly. My husband was against the wall while I slept closest to the doorway leading to the living room. Our little old house didn't have light switches, but pull switches with one hanging right over the bed within arm's reach. This detail is important for a moment later on in the story. I was in a sound sleep, suddenly awakened by the feeling of someone lightly flicking ice-cold water in my face. When I opened my eyes, I saw a faint glow of light out of the corner of my eye. Instinctively turning toward the light, my father was standing at the foot of the bed, with a soft amber glow surrounding his whole body. Shocked to see him, knowing he had died a few months prior in a car accident. His expression was sad and penetrating. Not believing my eyes, I blinked, opened them again, and there he stood, still staring at me. I reached for the pull string to turn on the light, and he was gone. With the pungent odor of gas hissing in the air, I coughed, dragging myself out of bed, suddenly realizing what was happening. I ran to the gas stove and turned it off, yelling at my husband to wake up, but he was not responding. I grabbed my little girl, wrapped her in a blanket, and moved her just outside the front door so she could get some fresh air. She was still asleep during all of this. I grabbed my husband by the arm, trying to pull him off the bed. Groggy and barely awake, I had to drag him toward the door. He started to stir more as I got closer to the door. I don't know what would have happened if I didn't have that sensation of water on my face to wake me up. I'm grateful for my father coming to warn me, so my family didn't perish due to gas poisoning that night. In a small town in Oklahoma in the late 60s, our entertainment during the summer was limited. We would often find ourselves bored with nothing to do. To pass the time, we would explore the town and make up our own fun. Sometimes we would ride our bikes to the local swimming hole or play tag in the park. On other days, we would wander around downtown, window shopping and people watching. It was a simpler time then, and we didn't need much to entertain us. We were content just being together and making our own fun. One favorite pastime for my friends and me was hunting for pop bottles in the summer. We'd get nickels every time one of us returned with an empty bottle. It wasn't hard to find places where people left their trash because there was always plenty around town: alleys, ditches, back porches, front yards, and side streets. So it didn't take long before we had earned our money from this pastime activity. We even asked neighbors just in case they had some stored up and wanted to get rid of them. After our intense search, we headed straight for a grocery store to cash them in. We would split the money and buy candy and pop with every cent. Candy and pop were cheap, so we each brought a bottle of pop and bags of candy to snack on. On the way to the store, we would excitedly talk about all the different things we were going to buy. Once we arrived, we quickly cashed in our coins and headed to the candy aisle. We each filled our bags with our favorite sweets and snacks and headed to the checkout. We were so excited to finally have our hands on all that candy. We had cashed in our pop bottles and were looking for something to do when we decided to explore an old abandoned house. The old house we chose was located down a dusty, lonely lane behind a field several blocks from our neighborhood. If you didn't live here, you would not know the house existed because it was hidden behind overgrown trees and brush. The old house had been abandoned for years, and it showed. It was surrounded by overgrown weeds, and the windows were boarded up. Yet, despite its rundown appearance, something about the house caught our attention. Maybe it was the fact that it was the only house for miles, or the fact that it looked like it had been frozen in time. We had heard the stories about the house being haunted, but that didn't deter us from exploring it. After all, we were curious kids and wanted to see what was inside. So one day, we decided to take a closer look. The closer we got, the more we realized how creepy the house actually was. It was like something out of a horror movie. Before today, none of us had ever come within 100 feet of this house. But today, feeling brave, we decided today was the day we would explore this house. So we ran across the field toward it, our hearts pounding in our chests. As we approached the house, we could see that it was in bad shape. The old white two-story house was weathered and needed a new paint job. Chalky, dry wood was visible where the paint had peeled away. On the side of the house, a door had been removed and was lying against the wall inside the house. So we all ran excitedly inside, through the doorless opening and into the musty-smelling house. As we entered the house, we made noises and talked loudly. I was thinking to myself that this was going to be so much fun. Going into a haunted house in broad daylight, I didn't think there was anything to be afraid of. But as you can imagine, everyone was hyped up on the candy and pop we had just consumed. We explored the bottom floor of the house, taking in all the damp and dusty familiar smells of an old, abandoned house. Our constant chatter breaks the stillness in the air. The rooms are musty and dark, and we were careful to avoid any potential hazards. Nevertheless, we're excited to be here, despite the slightly eerie feeling of being in a place that's been long forgotten. After about 30 minutes of exploring the bottom floor, we decided to go upstairs. We split up, going to various rooms on the upper level, but soon all met up in a room where the sun was shining brightly. The room was to the west of the house, and it was clear that it hadn't been touched in years. The dust was thick on the floor, and the windows were covered in so much grime that it was hard to see outside. Gathering together in that room, we noticed an open window that led directly out to the roof. There were old feminine pads all over the roof, and everyone began to laugh. Then all at once, this eerie feeling came over the room. The laughter stopped after a loud scream came from me. An intense feeling of fear gripped my heart as I felt a heavy slap against my cheek that came from thin air. Everybody got spooked and started running downstairs to get out of the house. After the last person came through the front entryway, we heard a loud crash coming from the house. Nobody stopped to investigate. We were all too scared. We all ran back down the dusty lane to the middle of the field before stopping our sprint from the house. Everyone started talking at once. What happened? We all wanted to know. No one could seem to make any sense of it. All of us were scared and in shock. One of the girls I was with screamed, "What happened to your face?" I put my hand to my cheek to feel the sticky wet area that was stinging. There were 3 claw-like marks across my face, dripping with blood. From that day, I vowed never to explore any abandoned houses again. It was a shock to hear about the death of our family friend in 1970. He was crossing a street in Oklahoma City when a car hit him, and he died instantly. His death had shocked us all, and we were all still trying to process it. The family member who explained the details said he died instantly. His shoes remained sitting in the middle of the road where the impact of the car hit him. We were all very sad and heartbroken. He was only 16, and his family had just moved to Oklahoma City from our little town. They had been there less than 6 months when the accident occurred. My whole family attended his wake and funeral. In our small town, everyone knew everyone, so the turnout was sizable. A week later, after his burial, it was the middle of summer. It was pretty hot that day, so I stayed in the house by the water cooler all day, reading and watching a little television. We had a small house and mostly used fans for cooling those days. We didn't have air conditioning, so the fans were our only source of relief from the heat. We put one in the front room, and the only way we cooled off in our bedroom was by opening the window. It wasn't the most ideal situation, but it was all we had. While relaxing, I couldn't help but think all day about how unfair it was that my friend was gone so soon. That evening I was trying to sleep but kept tossing and turning. My other 2 sisters were sound asleep beside me, my little sister next to me in the middle, and the other older sister was against the wall. Our eldest sister was sleeping in her own bed to the left of us. All 4 of us slept in the same room with the foot of our beds pointed towards the room's entrance. That night, I felt so restless, like I couldn't get comfortable no matter how much I tried. Every time I closed my eyes, I thought of my friend. A sliver of light came through a window on the side wall at the foot of my elder sister's bed. I was wide awake, wishing I would fall asleep as my sisters had. Finally giving up on sleep, I turned on my back looking around the dark room. I could see the forms of everything in the room, although it was very dark in the room. At the foot of my bed, I saw a dark cloud forming directly in front of me. It was darker than the shadows in the room, and it terrified me. I couldn't move. I could only stare at the strange dark cloud as it began to form into a shadow-like figure of a man. I didn't know what to do. I was paralyzed with fear. As the figure formed, I could see features begin to take shape. A face materialized before me, ghostly and pale. The eyes were black and empty, yet they seemed to stare right into me. The expression on the face was one of sadness, maybe even regret. I didn't know what to make of it. I soon recognized the form that emerged was our dear friend, appearing in the clothes he was buried. I was afraid and panicked after watching him for what seemed like forever. I tucked my head under the covers of our bed, telling myself this was not real. There was no ghost hovering at the end of my bed. I tried to calm myself down, but it was difficult, with the fear coursing through my veins. I knew I had to face this sooner or later and started to feel a little brave, knowing my sisters were right there. I took a deep breath and slowly lifted the covers off my head. He was still there and started to float towards me. He was a few inches from the bed. I must have passed out from fear because it was morning when I opened my eyes again. I never saw my friend again. Being 11 years old during this experience was confusing and frightening for me. I didn't understand what was happening or why it was happening to me. To this day, I have a hard time talking about it. I still don't understand everything that happened, and it's hard to relive those memories.